So basically, what did you guys think? What stood out to you the most about this episode? What could we talk about? We could talk about Opie was not going to back down from anything. He got sent to his bedroom without supper, but he still wasn't going to back down. He knew what he was doing was correct, and he was willing to pay the consequences for it. What else?
Opie knew his truth, even though he wasn't, being vocal with his father about it. His father never asked the question.
Yeah.
And he never asked the question. He just assumed.
Yeah.
His son was just saving money for a toy, whatever.
Yeah.
Just like the advocate, just like, Jesus was vocal about him going to the cross. He knew that was his plan being here. That was what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But none of us asked that question.
Yeah.
Why are you here? They just assumed he was here to do miracles. He was just, probably thought he was a false teacher. He was doing miracles.
Yeah.
Pharisees doing none of this.
Yeah.
So forth.
We could talk about parenting. That line, I heard a couple of oohs and ahs. Do you like me again, Paul? We could also talk about Tom. The henpecked Tom, the Tom who drank too much, was buried in the cemetery. And that is pretty much the definition of what it means to be a Christian, to turn your life over to God, is you are dying to your old self.
Buried the past.
He buried the past. And then finally, that is what being a Christian means. How would you define the word pride? Obviously, pride was an overreaching theme throughout this episode. Now, how would you define pride? Suzanne, what do you think? What's pride mean? All right. According to Webster's dictionary, pride is inordinate self-esteem, a reasonable conceit of one's own superiority in talents, beauty, wealth, rank, etc., which manifests itself in lofty airs, distance, reserve, and often in contempt of others. What's downright embarrassing for me, I'll tell you that. Here I am, the sheriff of the town, justice of the peace, respectable member of the children's fundraising committee. And what does he say next? And I'm raising a playboy.
Yeah.
Does Andy have any real concern? Does he exhibit any real concern for the underprivileged children?
No.
All right.
He could have gave Opie some money.
Absolutely. We can do the right things. We can raise money for the underprivileged. If there's not love behind it, if there's not true caring, if we're just throwing money at the problem so we don't actually have to get our hands dirty ourselves, what's his biggest worry? What are people going to think if my son only gives 3 cents? What does the Bible have to say about pride? Again, I think pride is an overreaching theme throughout the Bible. Now, this is my Micah 6:8. That's my life verse. All right. When it comes to actually living out your Christian testimony, I believe that Micah 6:8 is the verse that tells us how we should act. He has told you, men, what is good and what it is the Lord requires of you: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's it. That encapsulates everything that we are supposed to live by.
That flip side of pride, think about it. Let's just give an example. If you're sitting in service and offering time comes around, are you throwing $100 bill in the plate for everybody to see you throw the $100 in the plate, or are you coming up to the pastor after, hey, how could you use this, and doing it behind everybody, not letting everybody see you do it?
Yeah.
It's the intention.
I tend to get myself in trouble sometimes working in NASCAR sometimes, a driver or a celebrity in the sport will do some big charitable contribution or whatever, but they also issue a press release. And yes, sometimes you can also make the case. That those press releases also encourage other people to give towards this, whatever. Now, that's all I'm going to say.
The influence of the celebrity is drawing the common
Yeah.
public.
Yeah, that's the case you can make.
Oh, well.
However,
This person donated. Yeah.
Annabelle was not acting justly by making up the story, obviously. Andy was not being merciful when he sent Opie to bed without supper. In our house, no. In our house, that isn't even an option to send somebody to bed without supper. Was Andy walking humbly when he didn't ask Opie why he wasn't given more than just 3 cents? And I'll be honest with you, there's no telling how many times that I've done this lesson in particular and just watched the episode, but I don't know that it had ever really sunk in when Tom said, well, the choir wouldn't be any good without me as the second tenor. Everybody in this episode is prideful except for Opie. What was Andy's main concern even at the end? No excuse for that kind of stinginess. Just downright selfish is what it is. Even youngins ought to know better than that, especially this youngin, son of the sheriff, and he gives the least amount. That boy's going to make me the laughing stock of Mayberry. He doesn't care about the kids. He doesn't care about the underprivileged children. He cares about what people are going to think of him. Matthew 7:3 says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? Andy didn't have the first problem spotting the pride in Annabelle. I declare you're a sight in this world. You got too much pride to have a husband who drinks, so he didn't, even though he did. Don't that beat anything you ever heard of? It's that Annabelle. It's just like her not to be able to admit to anybody in town that she couldn't hold on to a husband. Only she could be so proud to do what she did, to do what she done. That finger's getting pretty long pointing at somebody else. It's all there ever was the matter with Annabelle Sylvie. Just too much pride, fearful of what folks might think. Now think real hard about that line. It's all there ever was the matter with Andy Taylor. Just too much pride, fearful of what folks might think. That's all there ever was the matter with Rick Houston. Just too much pride and fearful of what other folks might think. Now, before you point your finger at me, you can also say, that's all there ever was the matter with Loretta, or Joanne, or Suzanne, or Jerry. Now I say that. Suzanne, you ain't got no pride. You're perfect. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 23 says, a person's pride will humble him, but an humble spirit will gain honor. It almost always takes somebody else to bring us to our senses. Who was it that brought Andy around? Aunt B. Andy Taylor, will you just stop and listen to yourself? Oh, you've been talking, but you haven't been listening, Annabelle. I love the way that she sticks the knife in and she twists it by calling him Annabelle. That right there is one of the most profound lines that was ever recorded on the Andy Griffith Show, because it describes virtually every problem that we face today. Now, I'm not going to get political. Democrats, Republicans, conservative, liberal, everybody's talking, but nobody's listening. That goes for international relations. That goes with personal relations. You've been talking, but you haven't been listening. Let that get next to you. After Aunt B kind of brings Andy back to his senses, how does Opie deliver the final blow? How does Opie bring Andy back to reality very quickly? I'm gonna buy her a coat. The one she's got is kind of wore out. When I asked her how come she didn't get a new one, she said because her ma didn't have enough money. That is absolutely beautiful. Who here has ever had too much pride? I'm guilty as charged. I love this episode because it truly gets next to me, because it hits me exactly where I live. And you guys have heard this story before. You know, I used to work in NASCAR. I got to drive the pace car once upon a time at Homestead. I wrote a book about the history of the Busch Series. I've driven race cars at Atlanta and Bristol and Charlotte and Talladega. At one time, and y'all know this, I thought that the Busch Series revolved around me. All right. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 23 says, a person's pride will humble him. I walked into work one day and I was told I was being let go. I was fired. Just like that, it was over. I was given the rest of the day to clean my office out. And I went from being the ultimate all access insider to being on the outside looking in. And I'm ashamed to tell you how it was a shock to my system. It was a shock to my very being that they had a race the next weekend. And that was a shock. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 11 says, even a young man is known by his actions, by whether his behavior is pure and upright. Who is the teacher in this episode? Opie. Opie, you never told me that's what the money was for. You never asked. Opie was pure and he was upright, and his motives were as pure as they could have possibly been, because he was saving up his money to buy his girlfriend a coat. Wasn't buying her a toy, wasn't buying her popcorn, wasn't buying her tickets to the movie. He was buying her a coat because the one that she had was kind of wore out. Years ago, when the boys were 7 or 8, I'd had a couple of job opportunities back in the sport. They went to somebody else, and I was still on the outside looking in. And I said in front of Jeannie and the boys that I used to be somebody. And Adam came over to me and he said, you are somebody. You're my daddy. Boom. That's it. I was done. Now, in my life, I have never had anything hit me as hard as that did and completely change my outlook on life. And in that moment, it was okay that I didn't go to races. It was okay that I didn't get to hang out with race car drivers and, all that kind of thing. In that moment, it became my life to be Adam and Jesse's daddy and Jeannie's husband. Now that Adam and Jesse are, starting to take steps out of the nest, I'm struggling a little bit with that purpose. But that changed my life. That one statement changed my life. And I was Andy sitting at the table, completely humbled. What are we having for supper? You and Mama and Jesse are having chicken and I'm having crow. And yeah, I've got to do a lot of cool stuff. I wrote a book. It was made into a documentary film. I'm doing my NASCAR podcast now. and I love it. I absolutely love doing the podcast, but it's not who I am. The books that I've written, the whatever. Galatians chapter 6, verse 14 says, "But as for me, I will never boast about anything except the cross of Christ." That's the end there. That's the goal there. I will never boast about anything because I don't have anything to boast about except Christ and what he did for me on the cross. And 3 days later, in the empty tomb.
If you're looking for a church home,
do you want to be part of a family?
If you're looking for a place to grow.
If you're looking for a place to worship.
If you have questions about your faith.
Come see us at Maplewood.